Welcome to What Drives You. I'm Kevin Miller. In this episode, love versus respect. When and how do you lead with which? So, love and respect. That's the book. It's a book that first published in 2004, 20 years ago. I just now looked at Amazon and it's ranked at 885 in all books right now. So why is the book so popular? Well, it's because it resonates so much with so many people. This week, we've talked about peacemaking and respect, and I thought it relevant to bring this episode back where I talked with the one and only the author, Dr. Emmerson Eggerich, author of Love and Respect, the love she most desires, the respect he desperately needs. Now, please don't get hung up on the gender aspects. We all have desires of love and respect that we want. And the point Emmerson makes in the book is how they are different. And you'll find some people who feel and speak more towards love or respect. And recognizing this will help you understand and connect with people better and yourself, and especially your intimate relationships. So in this episode, I was joined by Tom Ziglar, CEO of Ziglar and son of Zig Ziglar. And he and I questioned and learned from the master, Dr. Emmerson Eggerich. Hey, when I'm not having these conversations on human potential, I'm walking with people in their human potential, especially in regards to their purpose, getting clearer, getting more focused, getting in alignment. If you want to talk about that, connect with me, kevinmiller.co. Here are a few sponsors who help make the show possible. Then Drive with myself and Tom Ziglar and Dr. Emmerson Eggerich. We talk about love and respect and help you understand when and how to lead with which one most. Let's see what we can learn for ourselves today. Well, Emmerson, I have known your name and the title of your book for many, many years. And when our listeners recommended you for the show, I jumped on it. So thank you immensely for taking the time to be with us today.
No, thank you. I've been looking forward to it. It's a great honor.
Well, to set the stage here, I'm going to ask you to clarify the difference between love and respect. I mean, I think we can view them differently, but in a marriage relationship, at least as I was thinking about it, I thought, I could easily kind of lump those together. So will you give us the primary differentiating factors between the two?
Well, to begin with, we do take the position that love and respect are the two foundational ingredients for successful relationship. The University of Washington studied 2,000 couples for 20 years. And they said, we now know the two key ingredients for successful marriages. And when those two ingredients are present, the marriage tends to succeed. And when they're not there, the marriage tends to go the other direction. And they said it was love and respect. And to your question, are they not synonymous? I mean, wouldn't we say that love and respect are the same? Well, we respect our boss, but we don't love our boss in that sense. And we might say that, we love our teenage son, but right now we don't feel any respect for him. Yeah. So they're distinct, even though there is a crossover. And one of the challenges in marriage is that in the gender differences, women will react in ways because when they feel unloved, they will move toward their husband to talk. The University of Washington found the vast majority of women will be critical. They will complain. That's for the purpose of connecting. Women deeply care. But the men were asked, what does ongoing criticism feel like to you? And the men said, it feels like disrespect. And the women were in a complete fog on that. So what we have here are some male and female distinctions that what feels loving to her, feels caring on the heels of, let's say, being unloved, ends up being interpreted by him as very disrespectful. So there's what I call a pink and blue difference. They also studied that 85% of those who stonewall and withdraw is the male during marital conflict. And why do we do that? Well, our heartbeats get to 99 beats per minute. We have to calm down. If you and I were best of buddies since boyhood days and we got into a heated moment, we separate because we're lethal. We could hurt each other. It's actually an honorable thing to do. But the women were asked, what do you feel when your husband stonewalls and shuts down on you? She said, it feels like an act of hostility. That was the descriptor, act of hostility. So here you have, again, the same event being interpreted through what I call the pink and blue grids. Neither are wrong. We're just different. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I want to dig into some specifics of what you said there, though. I did want to also I went back and did my research here and saw that you began the Love and Respect conferences in 1999. Then the book was published in, I think, 2005. And the book has, of course, become a classic in the arena of marriage, as have the conferences. And I'm wondering, from back then to today, has your perspective on the core message evolved to some degree, or is it basically the same as the day you wrote it?
No, it is pretty much the same. I think I've become wiser and I have a better understanding. Early on, women will say, Dr. Emmerson, I don't feel any respect for him. He's not superior to me. I'm not inferior to him. He hasn't earned the respect. He doesn't deserve the respect. I'm not going to lose a sense of myself. I'm not going to set the feminist team back 50 years. I certainly am not going to subject myself to emotional abuse. I'm not going to give him license to do what he wants to do. I certainly am not going to return to male patriarchy and have this fear of male dominance. But other than these things, I'm really open to hearing what you have to say about this. And so those are what I call the mantra. And early on, I stepped on these landmines. And women are not mean-spirited. They really are fearful. They're afraid that they're going to be, treated as a doormat. So early on, I kept blowing up, so to speak, because I stepped on the landmine. And I began to, discern what it was that was prompting women to make these comments and why they were so afraid. Because you and I serve and die for honor. What we feel about issues of honor and respect is highly positive, highly energizing. Whereas when we talk to a woman about putting on respect toward the spirit of her husband, she goes, gag me.
Okay, and that's exactly where I was going to dive in. I mean, your main premise to start off with, and I'll have said this in the intro, but you coined it the crazy cycle. Without love from him, she reacts without respect. Without respect from her, he reacts without love. And you cited that early on, this was right at the beginning of the book, early on as a pastor, you're counseling with so many married couples, you found yourself sympathizing with the women and being irked at the guys. And yet ultimately you came to the conclusion that while in marriages we tend to give much attention to husbands loving wives, we seldom give focus to wives showing unconditional respect toward husbands. Yet I know you're not pointing the finger at wives. So just speak on that just a little bit more and reconcile that for us.
Right. Well, I think you captured it well. I mean, I tended to lean toward the female. But as I did that, I really made her powerless. Because if it's all his fault, then she's a hopeless, helpless victim at some level and really has no influence. It's all about now trying to change him to get him to initiate correctly so she can respond to him. But that renders her impotent. And I didn't feel that was wise. I didn't think it was rooted in research. So I wasn't trying to place the blame on her as much as empower her. And it became very exciting when women began to apply some of the things that I was coaching them on, and how the men's spirit would soften and the men would move toward the wife to connect, whereas before he was withdrawing and going quiet in kind of a simmering anger. And the women were blown away by how the men were responding to this new message. For instance, saying, I'm not trying to be disrespectful right now. I'm upset. How do I say to you, I'm a little insecure now, need a reassurance of your love. I'm not trying to dish you right now. How do I get this message through to you? Well, even that kind of language, the men were staying engaged on.
So, Tom.
I've got a question because I'm, just an avid reader. I read your book years ago, and I listen to people all the time. And I heard one individual who I respect quite a bit. He said this. He said, if you base a marriage, the reason for a marriage, 100% on love, then if one partner falls out of love, the responsibility of the other partner would be to say, okay, I understand, it's over. If it's only based on love. And I know you can't give a percentage, but when you talk about the main ingredients of love and respect, and for the people who are on listening now, maybe some are thinking about marriage or maybe some are in a marriage, do you have a percentage of what it should be? Is it 50% love, 50% respect, or there's 4 ingredients that make up 90%? What is that ratio?
Well, for instance, we asked 7,000 people this question based on the University of Washington's research that love and respect were the 2 basic ingredients. And though there are a lot of issues like a child dying of cancer, these are real issues. But it's the hostility and contempt that we bring to the spirit of our spouse when we're dealing with those stressors. And the University of Washington discovered that it's that attitude. If I come at my wife, Sarah, with hostility while we're talking about money, she deflates not because of money mismanagement. She deflates because at a certain point she's feeling that I'm very unloving. And that's the root problem, okay? Now, in terms of those 7,000 people, based on that, plus the Bible in Ephesians 5:33 says a husband must love his wife and a wife must respect her husband. It's very gender specific, and the University of Washington got gender specific. And I always add, we all need love and respect equally. There's no debate that she needs R-E-S-P-E-C-T and he needs L-O-V-E. But these 7,000 people, we ask the question, when you're in a conflict with your spouse, do you feel unloved at that moment or disrespected? Asking the question based on the research on Ephesians 5:33, 83% of the men, Tom, said they feel disrespected. And 72% of the women say they feel unloved. So that may be getting a little bit at that percentage. And also Shawnee Feldhahn, who's a graduate of Harvard not law school, but graduate school, she did a research decision analyst out of Houston. And they surveyed the American male, not just the church male, but the American male. And there were a series of questions, one of which, and Shawnee asked me, should I ask this? And I said, oh, absolutely. And here was the question they asked these 400 men. And it blew the secular researchers away to such an extent that they ran the test again. But the question was, would you men rather be left alone and unloved in the world or be viewed as inadequate and disrespected by everyone? Almost 75% of the men said they'd rather be left alone and unloved. But what we've done today is we've interpreted the male spirit through a narcissistic profile. That feels egotistical to a woman. And yet you and I throw ourselves on a hand grenade in war to save our buddy because it's rooted in an issue of honor. It is extremely self-sacrificing. It's extremely service-oriented. But when women hear our need for respect, they filter it, not because they're mean-spirited. Again, goes back to that fear. They're afraid of what that is going to mean. But in answer to your question, we're pushing 75 to 80% of the men. I've even had men kind of embarrassingly come to me quietly and say, is it wrong for me to want my wife to respect me more than for her to love me? And of course, women cannot grasp that. It's because respect at best is a marginal issue. But if it's seen as a need, that he has a need for you to respect who he is apart from his performance. And as Kevin said earlier, it's unconditional respect, which is an oxymoron in the culture. Everybody believes respect must be earned rather than giving that as an unconditional gift. So what we always have to clarify, it's showing a positive regard toward the spirit of your husband when you're confronting things about him that aren't respectable. Because no human being responds to contempt. No woman responds to contempt, nor does a man. But what we're up against is that women will say, but he should know that I really didn't mean it. And she doesn't mean it. And so what you have here is a lot of confusion between men and women of goodwill. Does this make sense?
Absolutely. And that report, that's incredible. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you, Shawnee Feldhahn, we interviewed her, I think, 2 weeks ago on her new book. Yeah, The Kindness Challenge.
Yes.
It's not published yet. I think it'll be in the next week or so. She was incredible. I was actually thinking about it this morning so much, I emailed her with a couple more questions. So big fan there. Well, as we dig into some of these topics, I do want to just come back and, as much as we would say, hey, doing this is the right thing to do, looking at this goal and the motive. I mean, when you talk about the crazy cycle, you then follow that with the energizing cycle and the reward cycle. And it sounds like a recipe for hope, which of course is one of the favorite topics here at Ziegler. So I wanted to start off so that everyone listening can hear, if they take action on this, what are the payoffs? I know it sounds, again, elementary, but to put them out there, that this is just not an altruistic endeavor here. This is something that benefits us greatly. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the crazy cycle, as you pointed out, without love, she reacts without respect, and without respect, he reacts without love. And that's based on this felt need during conflict. Again, she needs respect, he needs love. But we just say to the person listening, you have to decide how that plays itself out in your relationship. And if that crazy cycle makes sense, then it's common sense that would say that if I deprive my wife of love, if she feels unloved during conflict, if I look at her, I have that attitude of condescending, whatever, I can't believe you spent that $500, you can't budget, man. I mean, whatever it is that we do, and you see her spirit deflate, it's not rocket science to conclude this isn't working, that she has a vulnerability when she feels that I'm not loving her for who she is. And the same thing, when a woman looks at a man with a look or a look of disgust toward his spirit, and he begins to think, you're just using this topic as an opportunity to send me a message that you don't like who I am as a human being. When our spouse begins to conclude that you really don't love me for who I am, you really don't respect me for who I am. Yeah, I'm an imperfect person, but somehow I feel in this relationship that you find me unacceptable. If that's how we appear, but that's not really the message we intend to send, then we need to start backpedaling. We need to come back off of it, not the least of which is a guy to say, my old man, he never did anything loving. I don't know how to do this love thing, and I get angry. But this is the third time you backed into the garage, and you're costing me money. How do I say this in a way that you don't feel in love? If he uses her mother tongue of love, she'll soften. She'll stay engaged. But when he starts calling her names, when he starts coming at her, these are completely ineffective methods to somehow achieve what otherwise might be a worthy end. And the same thing, if the husband says, can we be sexually intimate tonight? And she says, is that all you ever think about, you animal? Well, his spirit deflates. Why? Because you stepped on his air hose. He has a respect tank, and he needs to feel that you respect who he is, created in the image of God, apart from maybe, his poor performances. And when he begins to feel that you despise who he is, you're going to lose his heart. So what you have to do is backpedal. You have to say, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to dish you right now. I'm just feeling ill, and the kids are sick, and I shouldn't have said that. Will you forgive me? And he'll re-engage because he knows that she's not, at the end of the day, trying to be disrespectful. And most men know their women are extremely virtuous gals. They're good-hearted, good-willed women. But if we don't somehow let them know that we just stepped on their air hose, then people take up offense. And we feel vulnerable, and we start shutting down on the other person. We close off our spirit because we're vulnerable to the message, I really don't love you, and I really don't respect who you are as a human being. It just doesn't work. So that would be the first thing. We've got to soften this negativity.
Well, you just mentioned conflict. And as I first got into the book and your message, I think just thinking of some of the normal everyday goings on at the house and things said, and it's taken this way or taken that way. But you seem to make a distinction between that and in essence, the acute crucible of conflict. So is that two separate? I mean, I know it all ebbs into the same thing, but you put a lot of emphasis on this as it comes down to conflict. I guess that's just because that's where it's exacerbated.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent question. I mean, we're all going to have normal conflict, if I'm hearing you correctly. We're going to have honest differences of opinion, and it doesn't necessarily escalate to the crazy cycle. And that has to, though, be decoded and discerned. And one of the indicators that I say is when you see the spirit of your spouse deflate, and Sarah used to say this, we didn't know this early on in marriage. We've been married over 4 decades, 1973 we married. And she makes the comment on our conferences, she knew there were moments when she basically stepped over the line. She pushed me too far, and she would see my spirit deflate. I would just, and she said, I didn't know what I had done, but I knew we now knew. She had sent a message of disrespect. It was a look. And I was interpreting that as you don't really like me. You don't respect me. You don't have any admiration for me. And so she knew, and the same thing, when I would say things in such a way that I could just see that, the issue was no longer the issue. And not only were we going to have to now solve the issue, there was another issue that I was going to have to deal with. And now I had 2 problems, the one that we had just had, and now the new one I just created. But I realized, and she would voice it, it felt so unloving to me. And women give a voice and vocabulary to their need to be loved because we say love is unconditional. And therefore, if the woman feels unloved, the man has a responsibility to change. But because the culture subscribes to the idea that respect must be earned, then he has to earn it. And if he doesn't deserve it, she doesn't have to show it. And of course, once you lock into that, the man is responsible for the unconditional love, and he's responsible for the respect. And that probably explains why 85% of the men just withdraw and stonewall. They just shut down because they lose energy in the relationship.
Okay, well, you've mentioned the word unconditional a lot. And as I was thinking about this and my own marriage, I mean, of course, if I am being loving to my wife, it's easy for her to be respectful. She's being respectful to me. It's easy for me to be loving. So then we get to that crux of our humanity and our weak moments when she is going to respond to me in a very lacking in respect way, and that's going to happen. So in doing that, I almost feel like there's a preparation, or there must be, or I'm going to ask you, what is that preparation that I must take so that when that does happen, when she falls, when I fall, that we are prepared to, in that moment, in a sense, and it sounds bad, I couldn't find a good terminology, but be the bigger person or show that unconditional love anyways. Is there a preparation for that?
Well, and we say, who moves first? The one who sees himself or herself as the most mature. That's how we get at the point that you're making. But yeah, we're going to get on that crazy cycle. And when we get on that crazy cycle, who moves first? Well, the one who sees himself or herself as the most mature. Part of the illumination is if two people are willing to move forward on this and subscribe to the idea that not only is love unconditional, but respect is unconditional. And even, psychology and the social studies have revealed you have to show what is called unconditional positive regard toward the spirit of another human being. If you show hostility and contempt toward the spirit of a person because they failed you, you won't win their heart. You can maybe win that argument, you can do whatever, but you will not ultimately influence that person. Hostility and contempt in a chronic sense destroys relationships. So, but if in your case, your wife, if she is willing to subscribe to the idea that respect is unconditional, and that she has a responsibility to show you positive regard toward your heart, even though you fail to be who she expects you to be, then you're going to move forward very positively on this. What we're up against is the idea, as I said earlier, the man must show unconditional love no matter what, whereas the wife does not have to show respect if she does not feel that he has earned it. And the criteria for that is he ought to be as loving as she is. But what we're up against in all the research, women are nurturers. Women are the caregivers. It's off the charts. I have my PhD in child and family ecology, and it's off the charts in terms of how women care. So right from the get-go, men are going to come across as less caring, less sensitive, less loving than typically the woman is. And so what happens is a judgmentalism sets in, and she begins to be very critical toward him. And what she has to do is make an adjustment there. And part of that adjustment is to say, look, I'm very mad at you. I'm upset with you. How do I say this in a way that you don't feel I'm trying to dishonor you? How do I do this? But some women won't do that because they feel they're losing power. And we're pointing out you're not losing power. You're actually empowering yourself. And most good-willed men will immediately respond to that.
Well, you're hitting on something there that I wouldn't say that I have been ignorant of, but I think I probably am continuing to kick against the goads with, is that as a man coming into this intimate relationship, I by proxy am handicapped. Am I hearing you right?
Well, the culture says you are. The culture says you are. For instance, when I wrote Love and Respect, the publisher said, write it to women. I said, why? Because women are the ones who read the marriage books. And I countered, I said, did it ever occur to you because you're telling men like me to write it to women? I said, you let me write this book in a fair and balanced way, and men will read it. Look at how men conduct themselves in courtship. See, many women think it's bait and switch. We're one way during courtship, and then we switch after marriage. But the contempt comes after marriage. It doesn't come during courtship from her. And she's not trying to be contemptuous, but there is also a change in her. The look changes, one of looking up to the glow to that is gone, and he doesn't know how to get it back. But 49% of those who come to our Love and Respect conference is the male. And one of the encouraging points that I make is men are not indifferent to this. But if you don't speak a man's mother tongue, then he's not going to stay engaged. He's not going to respond. And this is why this has revolutionized marriages, because once women have used these vocabulary words with someone like you, that it will work. And so I'm not defending all male behavior. My dad had enraged issues. My mom separated for 6 years because my dad had a violent tendency. I'm very sensitive to this. I'm a wounded healer because of that. So I don't defend all male behavior. But there are a whole lot of good-willed men who would literally die for their wives who feel like you do. I come into this thing and I feel at a disadvantage, and somehow I'm the bad guy and I can never be good enough and she'll never be happy enough. And happy life, happy wife, and the whole responsibility and onus is put back on him. And I'm saying men will shut down at a certain point and women will not be empowered. If we can look at male and female as equal, though we're not the same, and begin to believe we both have tools, this works. And we focus on the family, spent $50,000 to evaluate the effectiveness of this message of love and respect. And it's mind-boggling. It's not a guarantee, but if there is any good-willed individual listening and you apply these to another good-willed person, I mean, this thing can take off exponentially. That makes sense?
I've got a question, kind of a practical tip or a tool question. Dad used to do this thing. He had it all pre-planned. When he would show up for an airline, if the flight was delayed, he would immediately tell the gate agent, "Fantastic." And they would go, "Why? Your flight's going to be canceled. You're going to have to spend the night." And he would say, "Fantastic." And so they would freak out and they'd go, "Well, why are you, excited about this?" And he would say, "Well, there's only 3 reasons it's delayed: bad weather, bad airplane, or something's wrong with the flight crew. And I don't want to be up there. I want to be down here." And so he had this mental model of that situation where he never knew when it was going to happen. He just knew it would. So for men and women out there, I'm a man and I come home and either the table is set against me or I step into it unknowingly, right? And you can feel it coming. So what is the pre-planned diffusing, statement or response or whatever that I can do? And the same for the ladies out there, because, let's face it, I have bad days and, sometimes I'm just not the most approachable, happy-go-lucky person when I get home. What can I tell my wife? Hey, when you see me in this state, what can she say to just change that? Maybe just because I've done Dad's thing before, and it's funny, it works. The amazing thing is you're going to catch the next flight that you could get on anyway. Nothing changes, but you have fun between then and when you leave. So,
yes. Well, and I think I love your dad's illustration because he was rightly interpreting probably the lay of the land. I mean, it was an accurate, rather than personalizing and taking this as an affront that somehow people are inefficient and don't they understand how important I am. He thought logically, what would be the triggering reason for this? And the 3 reasons that you established are not unreasonable. And so it would be fantastic. And we call that reframing, but it's reframing based on the facts. So for instance, if you come home and your wife's upset, one of the things that I didn't know how this would play in Peoria, so to speak, but we began to espouse the idea of trusting your spouse's goodwill. Does your wife have goodwill? And thousands of men have said, of course she does. I mean, at the moment, I don't think so. I think I want to get her a broom so she can fly across the living room. There is this feeling, that she's crazy or whatever. But when you sit down and says, is she a good-willed, virtuous woman? Almost all men would say, absolutely. She's head and shoulders more loving than I am, more caring. She thinks about me. She prays for people. So what we have to do at these moments of tension is remind ourselves that we're allies, not enemies. That doesn't change the fact that we're still frustrated, but just that little tweaking. She's a good-willed woman. I'm upset with her. She's upset with me, but I'm not going to escalate this to some declaration of a war and somehow treat her as an enemy who I despise because I think she despises me. That is an interpretation. And this has really helped a lot of couples when they've said, we've made a decision to believe each person's goodwill. Another thing that I talk about is that I believe God made us male and female, and neither one of us are wrong unless there's a moral issue, unless your husband is saying, should we sell the kids for cocaine? Unless it's a moral issue, almost all conflicts is a preference issue. It's a clashing of preferences. Should we send them to a Christian school or to a secular school? Should we, buy this color carpet or that? These are not moral issues, but these are the issues that create tension between us. And one of the things that has really played in Peoria as well is this idea that we're pink and blue. Neither one of us are wrong. We're just different. And couples were humored. Here, put on my pink sunglasses. You're not seeing this from my perspective. Well, no, put in my blue hearing aid. You're not hearing me right now. And kind of lightening up a little bit. And rather than concluding that because I know I'm right, therefore my spouse has to be wrong. And we sometimes subscribe to this because as a culture, we said men and women are equal. And then we've concluded, and it's a non sequitur, that we are the same. No, there's an XY, XX chromosome. There's an egg. There's a sperm. There are 400% some chemicals flooding over a female in the womb that causes the little girl to have eye-to-eye contact when she comes out of the womb. The nurturing capabilities we referenced earlier, these are rooted in biology that affects every part of a male and female. And oftentimes, in almost every day, Sarah and I get into some little tension because she's looking at it as a female and I'm looking at it as a male. And instead of resenting that, we come to this point, she's not wrong, she's just different. And just because I feel I'm right doesn't make her wrong. It just means that maybe my thought is better than hers. It doesn't make hers bad. And this has also been something that's been very helpful to us. Even though it's irritating, we stay lighter. We don't go into the crazy cycle because we trust the goodwill. And we also see that we have honest differences of opinion. And neither one of us are wrong just because we differ. We can both be right. Then we have to decide who's got the better insight on this particular situation. And that's a process. See, so many of us have to decide, is the presentation of Hollywood accurate, that you can have a 99% romantic sexual relationship? And the answer to that is no. We all know that, but we don't know that. And it's what I call the 80-20 rule instead. 20% of a marriage is going to have honest tension, and it's going to have difficulties. And you're also maybe going to have a 5-year-old that dies of cancer, and you're not going to go to Hawaii and have a second honeymoon. There are heavy issues that come to all of us. And the question on the table is, how do we deal with those 20% troubling moments? And I say, sailors in the Navy prepare for the storm prior to the storm. And then when they're in the open seas and the storm comes, they don't jump ship. They don't freak out. You don't hear in the evening news, 300 sailors went over the rail today. Well, why? Well, there's a storm. They didn't sign up for storms. And so we have trouble in marriage, and what do? We jump ship. And so my challenge is, if we don't accept that 20%, then a little leaven leavens the whole, then suddenly we begin to resent the other person. We shouldn't be having these tensions. We should be having relationship like Hollywood says. And Hollywood consists of a lot of intellectual, good-willed people who they themselves will acknowledge they don't do this in real life. They too struggle. So we need to be mature and say, look, there are going to be these tensions, and we need to roll with it during the storm. Because if you don't, you'll end up adversely infecting the 80%, and the friendship that God intends for us to have will suddenly just kind of go out the window. And this has also been a freeing thing called the 80-20. Allow for some of this. So like your dad, he allowed for the flight to be canceled. He put it within his worldview. This is going to happen. And when it does, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. And in fact, it might have prevented the end of my world.
Well, to encapsulate some of what you just said, you really gave, in essence, two foundational pillars, it felt like, that in this. So I'll speak from first person with my wife. It's one, understanding and valuing her different perspective, which that's not, complete rocket science, but I still forget it and I still come to it with my perspective. So understanding, being willing to understand her perspective, one, but then that other one, you said it a couple of times, believing in each other's goodwill at the core, that those feel like these are, I wish I had that in premarital counseling. Is that it? Is that two primary efforts in this love and respect journey is to understand, put those on the table and agree on both.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, as you point out, we all forget it. And the person who's listening think, man, don't beat up on yourself. I mean, I need to revisit this. But it is that 80-20 rule. It's not wrong, just different. But believing in that goodwill and coming to that realization that though we're equal, we're not the same. And that pink is not wrong for not being blue, and blue is not wrong for not being pink. And that we bring something. It has been said, if we both are absolutely the same, one of us is unnecessary.
Okay. So in this, another question, we have one of the books that I did read early on in marriage was Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, we're interviewing Dr. Paul White, who with Gary Chapman wrote The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. That's an upcoming interview that Tom and I have. So with that perspective, and again, first person, this is recent, even in my own marriage, where we were talking about these issues and realized, okay, we're gonna have to come together, because I think some things have even changed for each other. So I had to ask my wife, what is it then that does speak love to you, and for her to understand what does speak respect to me. So kind of a two-part question. One is, I assume that is a very tangible exercise that we need to do to start walking out this love and respect effort. Or is that a primary initial exercise? And two, can it change over time to where we do need to be revisiting that over and over again, because how we feel may change and evolve somewhat, or is it going to be pretty static? So
no. I agree with that. I mean, it's not static. It does change. And we have different needs over the years. As we see it with grandfathers beginning to have a greater fondness for the family unit than years he was, on the road and, just focused on his vision. But then, so we all come to these seasons. Women later on are much more interested in sexual intimacy than they were early on, and the men are a little bit less. I mean, so there are different ways, and we begin to filter these things differently. But I think what you did with your wife is just profound. And I think if everyone would follow your example, it'd be tremendous. That we ask the question, what would make you feel loved? What would make you feel respected? What do I do that causes you to feel unloved? And what do I do that causes you to feel disrespected? Of course, this is a very threatening question to ask. If there's tension in the relationship, we don't want to hear that. And particularly because those messages supposedly have been sent to us anyway. And so, I've been telling you for 18 years, But if two people are willing to revisit that, as you did with your wife in such a mature way, then we can, I think, really move forward quite rapidly. But here's the key, that we have to allow the other person to have a vulnerability. It would be so easy for you to judge your wife for feeling unloved when you can't imagine why she would feel unloved about that. So, for instance, you buy her a diet book because she's complaining about gaining 10 pounds. And she goes ballistic and says you're the most unloving human being. But if she gave you a diet book, you'd say, hey, thanks, what's for dinner? The research on body image is off the charts. Females are hypersensitive to how they look, and they interpret comments along that line to mean you'll only love me if I look like a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader. Whereas you and I can have a 50-pound spread on the front and the back, and we still know Atlas is inside there. And we're not intimidated as much, generally speaking. So what happens is when she says you came across very unlovingly when you gave me the diet book, you're in disbelief. Look, it's no big deal. See if I ever buy you a diet book again. So what we do is we dismiss her vulnerability because we can't imagine deflating over something so ridiculous. And the best gift we'll give to her is we'll just never bring it up. We'll just not do that again. But in our own mind, we think, man, she makes a mountain out of a molehill. And what happens then is we dismiss the other because where they have a vulnerability, I don't. And on the flip side, the same thing. The wife buys the third marriage book for the two of them to read in the last 12 months. And he sees the book sitting over there and he just shuts down because he hears a message to that third marriage book. I don't accept you. I don't approve of you. And I don't respect who you are, Buster, unless you change and become more loving like me. Okay, so he just shuts down. And if he bought her a third marriage book, she'd be on the phone to her girlfriends bragging. He bought a marriage book. No, I didn't tell him. I didn't even hint. No, he did. See, it's bragging rights. She's energized by that, whereas we deflate over the third marriage book. Why? Because men have a vulnerability. Women don't filter the third marriage book as a message of disapproval. They interpreted that as you value me, you value the marriage, we're going to improve it. They just filter it totally different. You and I filter it a different way. And the question on the table is whether women will dismiss the husband's vulnerability here and tell him that he's egotistical and the profile and narcissism is correct, or that God just made him different. And he's not wrong for that vulnerability. He's just different. And once we're willing then to hear the other, I deflate when you say this. And if the other person says, well, you need to grow up, well, then that'll shut that conversation down right now. But if Sarah and I can have that conversation, right or wrong, honey, when you come across to me this way, I feel vulnerable. I shouldn't. I should be a mature man, ready to, die for you. But the fact is, I am I think I'm more vulnerable to you than any person on the planet. And I just am vulnerable. And once she's willing to give me some grace there, wow, then I can be more relaxed and vice versa. And it just works. But back to your point, you both bring a maturity there. Others out there, that can escalate into a serious conflict unless they follow the criteria that I'm establishing here of allowing the other person to share a vulnerability, even though we couldn't imagine at all why they would feel that way. Trust their heart that they're being honest.
Well, so much of what you're sharing here, it's a paradigm shift. I mean, when you say it, it makes so much sense. Of course, you're hitting the nail on the head. You must be wiretapped in my house as well as some other folks, I imagine. But it's very unnatural, which is so much of the personal development focus that we have here on the Ziglar Show, whether we're talking about a message from Zig or from Shanti Feldhahn or you, because you're calling me to give to my wife. I naturally, of course, want to give to her in the same way that I want to be given to. That's just natural as rolling out of bed. And you're telling me, no, I'm going to have to respond in at least initially, an unnatural way. And if I'm going to have to embrace that. I mean, that is a new habit, a new paradigm shift that in the moment we have it. I mean, right now you're inspiring me. I'm ready to go home and do this. And it's going to be so hard not to fall immediately. As soon as that comes up, she says whatever, and I'm going to hit myself the next morning and go, I missed it. This is a daily working out, which is, of course, why you have the workbook, which I went through and is incredible. I really want to do that with my wife. I want to write it down, pen to paper, because this is going to take a lot of intentional changing of my nature, which, of course, anything good personal development wise does. But this is, I mean, again, sounds elementary, but this is going to be a journey. I mean, this is a time period that we're going to have to work this out and walk this out together in order to do it well. But I assume you're giving us the hope that we can do this and it's going to become habit that we do at the right moment instantaneously.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be there anyway. We're going to have these conflicts. And what we end up doing is we use methods that we think is sending that message. So a husband is unloving to motivate his wife to be respectful, and she's disrespectful to motivate him to be loving. And what we have to realize is that you can't be neutral on this. We're all doing things every day when we enter. But here's what makes it a little bit difficult, and why I think you're saying what you're saying. I said earlier, 85% of those who stonewall and withdraw is the man, because his heartbeats get to 99 beats per minute. They set up heart monitors and physiology in this love laboratory at the University of Washington. And 99 beats per minute is warrior mode. So when we get into a conflict, there's either going to be fight or flight. Well, the man doesn't want to fight with his wife, so you withdraw. And the women were asked, what do you feel when he withdraws? They said it feels like an act of hostility. But I, in my research, will tell you that every man does it out of an act of honor. So it raises the question, is it an act of hostility or an act of honor? It just depends on whether you're pink or blue. But why it's so difficult is that when you and I shut down, we actually think we're doing the honorable thing on the heels of something that probably felt disrespectful. So we see ourselves as filled with goodwill, trying to de-escalate what is going to get carried out of, get out of control here. And she's filtering this through a totally different grid. She doesn't see this as rooted in honor. She doesn't see that what she just did was disrespectful. Instead, she was feeling unloved and she was trying to do the loving thing. And this is why it becomes a real challenge, because each of us feels our hearts are in the right place. We don't get up early in the morning to storyboard ways to irritate the other person. But when we go to bed at night, something has happened from 6 until 10 where we're mad at each other. And we have a difficulty decoding what's going on because both of us feel that our hearts are in the right place. So too, on the other side, the research points out women criticize and complain. And as we pointed out, the men were asked, what do you feel about that criticism? Ongoing criticism feels like an act of contempt toward me. She's just using the topic as an opportunity to send me a message. She doesn't like who I am. But all that research I pointed out about women being nurturers, it's an act of care. The reason she confronts isn't to control, but because she wants to connect. She cares. In her whole mindset, it's rooted in care. So it raises the question, is it an act of care or is it an act of contempt? It depends on whether you videotape in pink or videotape in blue. But what makes it so difficult is that she knows her heart's in the right place while he's shutting down. And so this becomes really difficult. He's feeling she's being disrespectful. She feels she's being loving. He thinks he's doing the honorable thing. She thinks he's hostile. But once we get these simple grids in place, it doesn't become any more complex. Once we understand some of these basic ideas of love and respect, and you ask ourselves, hey, we're in a conflict right now, and my spouse's spirit is deflated. Do I have the maturity to say to Sarah that I just come across in a way that felt unloving to you? Because you just reacted in a way that felt disrespectful to me, but obviously I did something earlier on that triggered all of this. Or Sarah says to me, hey, I see, did I just step on your air hose? What just happened here? Did I just say something that dishonored you? Because that was not my intent. And if two people are willing to do that and are willing to hear the person say, yeah, you did, and then we say, I'm so sorry, here's the powerful thing. When you enter the other person's mother tongue and say, I was sorry, honey, for being unloving, it's almost axiomatic for a woman to receive that. It's a rare woman who doesn't say, well, I'm sorry too, I shouldn't have reacted that way. The research points out women say, I'm sorry incessantly, and she will immediately respond because you've entered into her female code where she feels obligated to meet you halfway. And when you say to a man, I dishonored you, you've entered what I call the honor code, and it's very compelling for him to soften and make some kind of gesture that everything's okay. I do forgive, and we're good to go again. It's powerful. It's powerful stuff, Kevin.
So I've got two quotes for you.
Yes.
One of them might even be yours. I think I know who said it, but I'm not 100% positive. But one of them is a famous Zig Ziglar quote. You're probably thinking of the same one. You can have everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want.
Beautiful. Oh, wow.
So as a husband, I want respect, so I give my wife love, and vice versa.
Exactly.
I mean, that's Dad's most famous quote.
Well, I mean, it's what I call the energizing cycle. His love motivates her respect, and her respect motivates his love. And it now goes upward rather than the crazy cycle. Without love, she reacts without respect. Without respect, he reacts without love. The opposite is if you want to spiral upwards, his love motivates her respect motivates his love. The challenge, of course, and when we do our conferences, the culture says his love motivates her love, and her love motivates his love, and we will all be happy. The idea of a man's need for respect